So with that being said, I'd like to turn this over to a EAS fan, alumnus, Stuart.
Thank you, Dan. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us live at the 2020 MB Analytics Symposium. As Dan said, my name is Stuart Blundell, and it's my privilege to be the moderator for this morning's panel discussion on a very interesting and relevant topic called Geospatial Answers as a Service. I am joined here this morning by a distinguished and diverse group of professionals from both industry and government. So let me introduce them and let them provide their views on this issue. And we'll do this in alphabetical order. Drew Baustian from MicaSense. MicaSense is a global leader in the development of multispectral sensors for the agricultural industry. Welcome, Drew. Dr. Kontgis, Director of Scientific Programs at Descartes Lab. The Descartes Lab platform provides a geospatial analytics service today. Good morning, Caitlin. Dale Manry, from the director, who is the Director of the Office of Sciences and Methodologies at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. Thank you for joining us, Dale. Chris Shroyer, co-founder and president of EdgeData, a big data analytics company. Good morning, Chris. And last but not least, Scott Soenen, VP of Product Engineering at Capella Space, a new space company developing a global constellation of high-resolution SAR satellites for site and activity monitoring services. Welcome, Scott. I have to say that based on your individual backgrounds in science, engineering, and business, I certainly think we have the right group here to really dig into this topic for the next 40 minutes or so. So, from my perspective, it certainly seems that Geospatial Answers as a Service is on the cusp of becoming a real capability to transform the industry. So my first question for our panelists is, can you describe how Geospatial Answers as a Service has the potential to support and or change your particular mission requirements and business model? Drew, your thoughts on the topic?
Yeah, sure. So I think Geospatial Answers as a Service has evolved quite a bit over the last few years from MicaSense. 3 years ago, we had a cloud software service that offered uploading, processing, and analysis of data. And the vision around that was that farmers would fly their fields, upload the raw data for processing, and then analyze once it was processed. Unfortunately, at that point in time, bandwidth and processing capabilities were a huge roadblock. So trying to upload 20 gigabytes of data on slow rural internet didn't work. And if you tried to process locally, it would take 10, sometimes even more, 10 hours. So I think in advancements in technology that we've seen over the last, even just like the last 4 or 5 years, has resulted in either faster internet speeds or field side processing that takes minutes to process data that used to take several hours, which leads to a geotiff of, say, 500 megabytes instead of a 20 gigabyte data set that can be uploaded to a cloud software for analysis for someone to get answers from that geospatial data. So I think because these advancements, turnaround time has improved really exponentially, which means the information is more relevant for farm managers. And so that's kind of what we've been seeing on the production ag side. And then on the research side, we've seen AI come into play. There's a company we work with called Vito in Belgium that's counting wheat spikes for phenotyping purposes on test plots, and the AI is helping to better delineate between one wheat spike versus 2 wheat spikes sitting on top of each other that is really hard to discern. So I think AI has been helping with that. So I think the turnaround time on production ag, the AI advancements in ag research, that's kind of what we've been seeing in this space over the last few years.
Super. So infrastructure improvements have made a difference. So Caitlin, at Descartes Labs, you guys have actively been working on this for several years. What's your viewpoint about how Geospatial Answers as a Service that is your business model, right?
Yeah, that's right, Stuart. Effectively, Geospatial Answers as a Service is how we've built the company. So we have a cloud-based geospatial data analytics platform that, the goal of that is making deployment of global scale machine learning models easy and efficient. And then internally, we have a team of about 27 subject matter expert applied scientists who use our platform to combine geospatial or other, location-based data with AI, ML applications to run models on our cloud services. So a customer might come to us with a problem that they'd like us to solve, and that team will build out an answer for them using our platform. And it can be anywhere from global in scale, continental, but with our computing infrastructure, we can deploy that quite easily. So this very much is in line with the business model at Descartes Labs.
Fantastic. Chris, your thoughts about Geospatial Answers as a service in your business model?
Sure. Thank you, Stuart. I appreciate that. And similarly, our business model has been built around providing answers, and we've been using that technology stack that allows for those answers. We worked very closely with the subject matter experts. We focus in energy assets with some advancement in the wind energy sector, but we're also beginning to work in other areas where you're digitizing assets, you're performing automated condition assessment, you're utilizing the geospatial data to gather multiple layers of answers, frankly, but at the core, it's how is that asset performing and how can I the life of that asset. So the two areas that we're working to advance that is getting predictive. So moving from reactive answers and telling you what's happened in the past to here's what's going to be happening in the future. The other is, as we were talking about, moving data up into the cloud and back down, and the tremendous amount of data and bandwidth that requires. We're also working to take the technology to the edge. So I would like to get those answers sooner. I'd like to get them potentially at the asset where real-time decisions can be made versus waiting for a processing package that needs to happen. So that's how we look at it. It's been core to our business.
That's great points. I think, Scott, we're hearing that infrastructure, time of delivery, those are really critical things to making success. Capella has a terrific story. The communities know about it. So what's your thoughts about how Geospatial Answers as a service is an outcome from what Capella's mission is?
Yeah, as a newer company, we've really been able to bake some of these newer approaches into our business model and into our product features. While we're initially focused on providing the rapid tasking and SAR data as a product, we're also looking at the ecosystem of companies out there providing answers as a service to see how our unique ability to provide high resolution data, regardless of cloud or time of day, might help them enhance the differentiation of their products. And since Answers as a Service is enabled by software and automation, data providers like Capella need to think about how accessible their services are and how easy they are to integrate. So we've taken a cloud native approach with an API for all of our services, whether you want to task a satellite or pull an AOI subset time series from hundreds of our cloud optimized geotiffs, or from TileDB, we have an endpoint for that. We think this approach will really resonate with those that are building geospatial answers as a service.
Terrific. Just to sort of encapsulate what I'm hearing is that, it's about infrastructure, cloud services, costs coming down on data processing, the ubiquity of location intelligence data, and then really delivering that information specifically to address a question in a very timely manner. I want to pivot a little bit to the concept of trust, right? And the idea of how customers can start to believe in the service. So, one thing that seems important to me is that you better have a well-formed question if you're going to get a good responsive answer back from that type of service. So Chris Shroyer of EdgeData, give me an example. It's really a two-part question for everyone. What's a good example from your line of business where a customer's asking a well-formed question where you can give them real value versus maybe a poorly formed question where you've got to converge on an answer for the customer where they're willing to pay you?
Absolutely, and I can kick that off. Thanks, Stuart. So for us, we began with what was a pretty well-formed question. As I mentioned in my earlier comments, the alignment with the marketplace, the subject matter experts, the domain experts that knew what they were looking at as an asset, they simply wanted to know from us where damage on a wind turbine might be, the classification of that damage, and then from that, then we would define workflows and automated processes to make repairs or produce workflows or calculate the amount of damage that you have or the amount it's going to take to repair. So it was well defined because it had been a legacy process for them. We were just automating that process, and rather than having them look through thousands of images, we can nail that down into the handful of images they care about, exactly what's happening there, and bring that answer to them. So well-formed, we could build the technology stack, we could build the data flow to get them the answers they needed. Other questions that aren't as well-formed, you can end up really chasing your tail and providing a lot of data that does not have value. So the core for us is to get to the value. What's truly the value layer? And sometimes it's hit and miss. So we go through flight plans and technology stacks and data models and make sure that we extract that. But it can be a long, tedious process and expensive process if you're not defining the question early so that you can define that right technology. Otherwise, you tend to chase it.
Great answer there. Drew, from the agricultural perspective, well-formed questions, poorly formed questions, where have you seen success and where have you seen customers struggle?
Yeah, so we're currently working on a marketing case study with a spearmint farm, and I thought that would be a good example to share. So a big issue for this particular farm is weed presence, and it can really impact the quality of their harvest. So in this instance, there's a particular thistle that they're wanting to identify early and eradicate. So it's like a very well-defined problem that they're trying to solve with imagery. So that's a good example of a well-formed customer question that we really love. A poorly formed question is, I think, the stereotype of how drones have attempted to be used in agriculture for the last 6 years. Let's put the drone in the air and see what it tells us. Sometimes that's interesting, right, but it rarely leads to clear value.
Great points. Caitlin, your thoughts on the topic?
Sure. Yeah, so I think a well-formed question is one where we really understand how the customer is going to use the outcome, so how they'll actually use that geospatial answer. We really try to work in partnership with our customers to figure that out, because sometimes the approach that they might initially suggest or that we might initially come up with isn't quite right. And if we can explore the issue in depth with them and really understand the ultimate use case, we can come up with some sort of a proxy approach where it's maybe not getting at exactly what they want, but it's still helping them solve their problem. So I think a well-formed question is really, a requirement is understanding exactly how they'll use that in their business, and to do that, really forming a strong partnership with the customer.
Excellent. And any thoughts from your project experience where you've had to sort of iterate through and help a customer understand how to discover what their well-formed question is, because what they're presenting you with is, hey, let's just see what happens type approach?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there's a thought with remote sensing data and satellite imagery that you can see anything all the time, and having to explain some of the issues with clouds or revisit rates and just really talk through what's actually possible is something that we have happen on, I would say, almost every project with customers that we have. It's really about educating them about the possibilities of geospatial data and what can be accomplished using the data sets that we have available. Excellent.
Scott, you're right at the starting point of your whole delivery of information and analytics to the marketplace. What do you think? How are you going to guide customers to really help them answer the questions that need to be answered?
Yeah, we think that we're all very familiar with how the spatial component plays into well-formed or poorly formed questions. But we think that the temporal component is really as important. So, and maybe there's two temporal components. So using an example of crude oil storage tanks, question might be how many crude oil storage tanks are located in a particular location today, and I'd like the answer within 30 minutes. So these temporal components are critical requirements when you're thinking about how to get a question answered. For example, if you want to know how many tanks there are today, then maybe some SAR imagery and computer vision methods or pulling features from OpenStreetMap is the best approach. But if you want to know how many tanks there were in 1980, then you'll need a different way of answering that question. Also, if the person posing the question needs an answer in seconds, then you'll need to have all of your answers ready and cached. Whereas if they don't think, whereas if you could derive the answers on the fly, then the time component becomes a little less important. So putting all those together, I think a great question for Capella and our analytics customers would be, what's the current fill level of oil tanks in a particular location and every day following today? And they'd like that answer within 6 hours of the observation. On poorly formed questions, I think maybe it's just the case that less precise questions can only expect less precise answers.
Great points. And I mean, I think it almost sounds like, you have to sort of deliver, if you're delivering products as part of your Geospatial Answers as a service, tailor the products to really meet requirements where you're sort of establishing the swim lane for the customer, and they can work within that. How many ships in a harbor, how many things that you're good at doing. So we've talked about technology, infrastructure, cloud, AI, that type of thing, very important. We've talked a little bit about how do we work with customers to guide them to the types of questions where we can really provide value and in turn make money. I want to talk about trust, because building trust with customers is a way of establishing credibility, and it's a way of building your business. So, one of the things about trust is understanding errors and uncertainties in your answers. And that's always a challenge in how do you present that information to a customer. So, let's talk a little bit about that. In this sense, Scott, let's start with you on this one. You talked a little bit about the spatial components and resolution and time and so forth, but what's your thoughts about how you deliver transparency and error estimation to customers?
Yeah, transparency is really key, but it needs to be both transparency in the results as well as transparency in the methods and the metrics. So, for example, if I told you that the geolocation error of an orthorectified image product was X meters, you should probably be skeptical and ask me how the assessment was done. A more transparent answer would be that accuracy is X meters, CE90 evaluated on randomly distributed GPS located checkpoints. And maybe an even more transparent answer would be, here's a link to the public GitHub repo with the data and the open source software that we use for evaluation, and please go ahead and check our work. It's kind of interesting to compare transparency and performance assessment methods and venues for geospatial imagery providers with performance assessment for companies doing geospatial answers as a service. In the imagery domain, there's venues like the Joint Agency Commercial Imagery Evaluation, where experts from NGA and other federal agencies provide independent verification of data quality, including the measurements of error and uncertainty. And they share these results with the broader community of users through publications and workshops. Geospatial Answers as a service may be too broad to have a single similar venue, but it does seem like users would benefit from similar standardized assessments of results from an independent authority. One other interesting approach would be what our partners in the SpaceNet partnership are doing. It's essentially defining a question like how accurately can you predict building footprints with off-nadir imagery or SAR, and then having a competition where the brightest people in computer vision and machine learning take a crack at it. They then evaluate the results with standardized approaches and metrics and share the results publicly. And it really gives a sense of performance for an application area, essentially setting a benchmark for the state of the art. So Geospatial Answers as a service providers could really compare themselves with those benchmarks to show how they meet or exceed them.
Yeah, really interesting ideas there. I think that having that independent set of truth-sayers out there could yield real benefits. Caitlin, your thoughts from the Descartes Labs perspective about communicating error and uncertainty from a platform perspective, from an answers perspective to your customers.
Yeah, at the risk of echoing my last point, I think building a really strong partnership and educating non-experts is really critical for those of us delivering geospatial answers as a service. So, you know, if we enter into a partnership with a customer, we'll meet regularly, convey results that, you know, haven't worked out and explain why. And then I think ultimately having a really rigorous quantitative assessment of you know, the accuracy metrics around a product we're delivering. And of course that has its own challenges with finding ground truth. Getting those sorts of data, I think we can all agree, is sometimes difficult in different parts of the world. But I think it's just tremendously important for data analysts to clearly communicate limitations of an output, including the spatial accuracy, how often it can be updated, what factors might introduce bias, for example, the time the image was collected, et cetera. And being as open with a customer as possible, since they may not, you know, have the same insights or be experts. So I think, you know, educating folks about the how much you can derive from a geospatial answer is really critical.
Great answer. Drew, my sense is a farmer in Iowa is not going to be shy about telling you you're wrong. So how do you ensure that your analysis is field worthy?
Yeah, I think it kind of stems off of what Caitlin ended on, and it's just like you have to clearly define what the foundational data is capable of doing. So we get lots of inquiries from people with specific problems, hoping we can give them a yes/no answer as to whether our cameras can solve them. And a lot of times we need to just clearly convey exactly what our cameras are capable of doing and what are capturing, and tell them, you know, if your problem has these characteristics, it's possible that our cameras will help, but the only way to find out for sure is to capture some data. So a couple of examples of that are people approach us saying, we want to identify gas leaks in pipelines, and we think that maybe the gas is causing the vegetation around that pipeline to suffer, and so maybe we could identify that dying vegetation and tie it to a gas leak. Or we've had police officers approach us at trade shows saying we want to try to identify a body, and technically, if there's something like that under the ground, it's going to impact how the vegetation grows above the ground. But there are a lot of other factors at play. You know, the vegetation might look similar in other areas due to other factors, or there might be a tree canopy above the ground where that's located. That makes you not even able to see that specific area. So I think you just need to clearly convey what's possible, and at the end of the day, you just have to capture some data and take a look.
Super. Chris, your thoughts on the question?
Yeah, so at the risk of repeating, I mean, there's certainly a consistent theme here with transparency and building that trust. For us, we've done a few things. One is be very transparent with the process and with the expectations. We also perform a baseline and a precision and recall so that we can track our performance. We have a quality assurance and process as well to validate what we're seeing. So along our process, we have various methods to assure that we share that data. We also do a capture assurance tool so that we know that we have the data. In fact, having those gaps in the data, if you're just looking for damage, do you know that you've looked at all parts of the turbine? So we have assurances along the way that help us, and we're very transparent with those and put that information in the hand of the customers.
Super. And we're getting a few questions rolling in, but I want to go through another just a question as we talked about earlier in our preamble to this. So Caitlin, one of the things that I've noticed when I've used Google and so forth is that it's very good at helping me to understand the things that I haven't even thought about buying, or Amazon, excuse me, that I should buy. And so there's suggestions that, that can come in, or discoveries when you're doing project work that can help a customer in ways maybe they hadn't anticipated. And I think that's one of those value-add pieces for Geospatial Answers as a service. So, any thoughts about how your past project work, on how your company was able to improve Geospatial Answers as a service, when working with customers?
Yeah, certainly. This goes back to a point I was making earlier, that it's really important to know what the customer's ultimate goal is and how the output will be used in order to come up with the best possible answer for them. And so often we find that there are proxies that don't directly answer the need, but they still provide insight into a related pattern that still meets the end goal for the customer. And so the example that jumps to mind for me from Descartes Labs, though it doesn't use AI or ML, is when COVID struck earlier this year, there was a big question for governments and different agencies about how quickly it would spread and where. That's obviously a very difficult question to answer using satellite data. So we use sort of alternative anonymized cell phone data to track aggregate movement, and created a mobility index. So we look at areas like states, counties, or countries. So we've looked at this globally, and we use this data on a daily basis, and we can almost immediately see when movement in places like Hong Kong and Iran plummeted, which suggested that a few weeks later rates would decline, and sure enough they did. And we saw similar trends in the United States. So when the virus got to New York, folks in counties across the state sort of stopped moving, and case rates plummeted. In hard-hit areas like the South, we've never really seen the drop in mobility. So though we couldn't exactly track transmission rates, but there are creative ways to come at the problem using novel, lesser-used data sets that we don't traditionally think of.
That's great. And really, the platform was well established to handle the geoprocessing of that aggregated data. So, that makes perfect sense. Chris, your thoughts about how you've actually been able to improve your business, by thinking about what the customer requirements are.
Sure. So for us, staying close with the customer, staying close with the marketplace, and understanding how those answers can become more predictive and how they can make them a more proactive organization has been key for us. The other is the amount of data and data sets that can come off, and the accuracy of that. So we've created a great way that we've overcome this is we've created an automated capture process, where in our case we've built the capabilities to navigate the drone in a very complicated three-dimensional space around a wind turbine, all four sides of each of the three blades. It assures us that we're capturing data in a consistent manner that allows those answers to be obviously more consistent themselves. So the quality of the imagery, the repeatability of the imagery, also the associated metadata to be able to put the location of damages and other inspection data exactly where it is within millimeters on a wind turbine. So that becomes very important as you think about the structural integrity of the turbine and other areas. So we've solved that in multiple layers and have examples of that.
Scott, your thoughts on the improving the service?
Yeah, I think the most tangible thing that can be done today is really suggesting additional questions and answers based on clear application-driven correlations or refinements. For example, if a user's interested in the question, what is the aggregate yield of crops in Oklahoma in 2020, they might also be interested in knowing the yield of individual fields or when fields were harvested. I'm not sure that AI or machine learning is particularly relevant in that approach versus just having a solid understanding of your user and their use case.
Makes perfect sense. Drew, your thoughts? I think we might have you on mute, Drew.
Thanks. I was just mentioning that since we're focused on hardware development, we really rely on third-party sources to help our customers in this space. So I think satellite imagery, other already available data sets such as soil maps, historical yield maps, or perhaps even the type of hybrid seed that a farmer is planting, could all be leveraged in AI or machine learning to help a farmer or farm manager decide whether a closer look is needed with a drone, or whether there's a high probability that some type of deficiency or problem is occurring that may need a closer look. And so, to my knowledge, I think companies like the Climate Corporation, Farmers Business Network, Farmers Edge, they're sort of aggregating all those different data sets and trying to help farmers better understand what questions they should be asking and where they should be looking more deeply at potential problems.
Great point. So we've got about 10 minutes left. A couple questions are rolling in, so I want to pivot to a question from Zach Noren, because I think it really gets to the root of some of the comments we heard yesterday from Shai and so forth about, is there really a geospatial industry, or is there really many industries with geospatial problems? So, Zach's question is, when I think of answers as a service, I think of providing information that directly informs business decisions. Along the lines of having a clearly defined question or requirement from a customer, do you think this is a problem that we can actually solve, i.e. transform all the technology, all the things we're really good at, all the algorithms and stuff into things that improve business decisions? And the last piece is, or is answers as a service out of reach with technology today? Chris, you want to start us off on this one? I know that we talked a little bit about how EdgeData is able to really hone in on maintenance and service requirements for very expensive wind turbines, but you've seen alignment of your big data services to really solve other business problems. So can you address the business issue of geospatial data and how it contributes to your customers' improvements?
Sure, absolutely. For us, it's a matter of taking that data set, providing the answer. The business decision, key to us, becomes a couple of things. One is, are we performing the asset, or is the asset performing at its peak efficiencies? So for us, one of the examples that can deter efficiency is leading edge erosion. And so our ability to detect leading edge erosion on a blade, if they have major damage, it can be up to 25% efficiency loss on that turbine. We can give them real numbers that can assess what that's costing them. So an immediate business return on investment for the repair, doing the repair, or also extending the life of the asset. So the other part of that is, if I can get 3 more years, 5 more years out of that asset because I maintained it well, then that's all money that goes to the bottom line. Very, very big dollars from a business standpoint. So we tie those calculators to our answers and give them true budget-making types of decisions, and we do that in multiple layers.
I like that. Drew, your thoughts? Really hitting the business requirements of your customers from all the technology, all the spectral science, et cetera.
Yeah. So what I heard is basically, is it practical, and will it really deliver tangible value? And the one thing that comes to mind is just in our commercial research customer base, their main demand is I want more accurate data. And I spent some time before getting into this line of work, doing collecting data from the field, manually, basically looking at test plots, counting plants, that sort of thing. It was really subjective, and the counting number of plants in a plot might be accurate, might not be accurate. Now we have plant counting algorithms that are delivering up to 98% accuracy. So we're giving plant breeders more accurate data sets, which is leading them to make better decisions on what hybrids to move forward with into commercial production, which is ultimately leading to better performing hybrids, better sales on those hybrids, better bottom line for whatever company is producing those hybrids.
Scott Soenen, your thoughts on the topic?
Yeah, it seems like the winners so far, and I think there are some winners in the geospatial answers as a service market. I think it's the ones that are really thinking about focused answers to very well-defined questions. I think really the key is understanding, having a deep understanding of the use case and really being able to solve the last mile. I think that's critical to market traction. Yeah.
Terrific. Caitlin, I would put Descartes Labs as one of those companies that is, so your thoughts here on handling all the science, but boiling that science down into things that improve people's lives and or business.
Yeah, I mean, we certainly are operating under the understanding that Geospatial Answers as a service is a viable business model. I think, we can't answer every business question or address every problem with data sets we have now, but we're seeing more data come online than we've ever had. And I think the world's just going to keep opening up in this regard. When it comes to actually making a business decision, we find that we provide one input into that decision, but usually it's a more, there are other feeds that a company has to make a decision. So, using a hypothetical example that I'm fairly familiar with, we might be able to map the health of rice paddies across the globe and where they are located, whether they're flooded, et cetera. But, when COVID hit, folks were leaving the city, going back home to their fields. The supply chain kind of broke down. And that's something that a company might have insight into that we don't necessarily have, but that might affect their decision about, what yields are going to be, what the global market for rice will look like. So we provide one input, and then we really work with customers to get the rest of the way
Great
there.
answer. So we've got about 4 minutes left, and I want to hit Amanda O'Connor's question because I think it's really important, and it comes back to the concept of prediction. And here's the question. Stuart, at what point do we have to anticipate what the market needs versus starting with a well-formed question? Where does developing an analytics people don't yet know they need come in your business model? Like the iPhone story, no one asked for it other than maybe Steve Jobs throwing his Sony Walkman in the trash because it couldn't handle enough songs. So where do we go? How do we anticipate what the market needs? Caitlin, it's kind of a lightning round. Give me a 30-second answer on that one.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a tension that we deal with all the time. We want to address customers' needs now while also, doing market research, trying to figure out what the next big product is that we can deliver. I wish I had a tidy, easy answer, but I think it's just talking to as many folks as possible, interacting with as many novel data sets as possible, and getting all the smart people in a room, and that's what we're trying to do at Descartes Labs with our science teams.
Yeah, and I would just add on to that, the fact with your mobility index from the aggregated cell phone data, that was just a analytic that people know about it, but you created it at scale because of your platform and because of COVID and took advantage of that situation. Chris, your thoughts on predictive and anticipating what the market needs and getting out ahead of your competitors?
Yeah, for us, the focus on predictive is important, not just in our product set, but also understanding the market. So continual engagement with the market, continual questions, trying to understand the need, that core problem, and being ahead of that problem and enabling the new technologies and to go answer additional questions or create more predictive data.
Drew, your thoughts? I've heard, concerns over certain types of herbicides, and certain spreads of soybeans and so forth had people's concerns, and that was an analytic that people weren't sure about from their neighbors spraying herbicides. So real world examples in agriculture, changing conditions. How do you anticipate what that market's going to need? That's a tough market.
Yeah, it is. And I think trying to come up with some value that the ag industry doesn't know it needs is not realistic, in my opinion. I think the only way forward in using drone-based remote sensing in agriculture is to get as specific as possible, specific crop type, specific growth stage, specific geographic region, define the problem in that specific scenario and see if we can solve it with with remote sensing. I think that's really the only direction we can go.
Scott, with all those satellites going up, can you be predictive? Can you anticipate what the market's going to need before the market knows it?
Yeah, I think that's a tough one, but I do think the right approach is certainly to start with a bold idea, build out a minimum viable product and then iterate from there. I think if you do wait to fully understand the question that you're trying to answer versus just iterating, you might be moving a little too slowly.
Great answer. So we've reached the end of our time, and I'm not sure we're being thrown out by Siri yet, but before that happens, I just want to thank all of my colleagues on the panel. It's been a real privilege to have this conversation with y'all, and and for the global people, global customer base tuning into this. Geospatial Answers as a service is coming. It's here now in many respects. Descartes Labs has that platform. EdgeData has that platform. MicaSense is delivering answers, and Capella is on the point of a global constellation to deliver this. So it's a reality. I think the questions of how it gets delivered to customers and transparency and error estimation and building trust, those are all things that are going to play out in this marketplace in ways that I don't think any of us truly know, but the folks on this panel are leading the way